Welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding, where in the last episode of our Catalina Wherry project, we finally got to the planking stage. We got our garboards on, we trimmed the chine, we learned a little bit about beveling plank laps, and finally we learned how to cut some plank gains. Now we're ready to keep on rolling with hanging the broad planks. Now broad planks or broads are all the planks between the garboard and the turn of the bilge, or what we call the binder plank. Now the reason we call them broads is because the planks running alongside the keel are often a little bit straighter, and therefore we can get slightly wider planks out of our given planking stock. We don't need to cut curves out of them and waste a lot of material. And in larger craft, because the boats live in the water, those planks are constantly submerged, and therefore they're more stable. Planks above the water line have a shrinking and swelling action that demands that we make them a little bit narrower in order to keep those plank seams tight. So below the water line, we can just make them broader, hence the name broads. So let's take a look at some of the challenges in fitting our first broad on building the Catalina Wherry. All right, we've got our first plank on. I trimmed it all off and I threw a layer of glass on the bottom here, forming my, I gotta come up with a name for this. I like to think of it like a chassis, you know? This combination of glued planking and bottom like this and then glassed over, it really creates a structural girder that's quite substantial. Anyhow, on to the second garboard plank. And back here was the trickiest part to try and fit it, mostly because I couldn't actually put the whole plank in its proper location in order to trace on the battens, and that's because it's a captured plank. It's stuck between the gain on this plank and the transom itself. So I had to sort of let it hang over a little bit, and I left this long, knowing that I would try and trim it down in place. So that's exactly what I did. I left about an extra 1/8 of an inch or something like that on the depth of this particular plank down here. And I knew I could taper it out to where I could get a reasonable pencil line back here, and just slowly worked it down until it fit nicely. And it's all worked out pretty good. It's sitting quite good. So I'll show you a couple other little things I came up with along the way here. All right, I don't have a great place to try and like fasten these planks together with screws to locate them. So what I came up with is just gluing a wooden block onto the existing plank. So I just, made up some little scraps here and just used some cyanoacrylate glue to tack those in place. So I've just done a couple of them, and that's just going to be enough for me to sort of get the plank where I want it. And what I'll do, I can do this right now. So I'll just throw a little pencil line on there so I know when I come along here to start tacking it all. Once it's all glued up and I've got to get it right in its final position, I can just eyeball, aim for these guys, get it on here, clamp it in place, and then I can just knock these out after it's all clamped and made up. So down here, I got another one of those blocks here that's grabbing this guy in its finished location, and I was just about to mark the scarf for these two planks here. So this plank, the scarf is still off at a weird angle. I just squared this up now, so I need to finish planing that back. But the little trick that I came up with is I'm overlapping them like so. And then I'm using this little piece of plywood. This is my scarfing jig. And that's giving me that extra 1/8 of an inch that I need for the depth in order so that the scarf lies nice and flush. So with that, I can take the same jig here. Actually, a fit is a better word for it. So there's my new line to scarf to. Then on the back side, so this guy's going to get trimmed down to here, and of course I need to make sure I'm scarfing the other side of this and not screwing that up. So we could even get rid of that. So that's all there is to that. So far so good. Now I've got the next planks are already traced out and ready to go on. And they present a similar problem down at the back end here. Just like with this one, I can't quite get it into place properly, so I've marked these out to be extra wide back here. Now the thing is that this plank, the beveling of this plank is going to... So the beveling of this plank is going to be interesting because it's going to go from a proper bevel around amidships, but back here, the bevel disappears. In fact, it disappears about a third of the way back from the transom here. And we get a reverse bevel. So that means that the plank that I offer up is the one that has to get beveled. So there's a point at which it's going to just make this switch from this plank having a bevel on it to the new plank having a bevel on it. And I've never done this before, so this is going to be kind of interesting. I'm really not too sure how it's going to go. I'm going to have to figure that out. But I'm pretty confident we'll get it figured out somehow. And it's not going to make for the greatest structural joint back in here where it's a tight tuck, so we will have to make a point of doing something about that. And that could be putting a little layer of fiberglass cloth on the inside over that joint, or it could just be like adding some blocking to it. And Paul Gartside has got a boat in his little lineup, just a small dinghy that's got the same features here of this box keel meeting the planking, and so he solved it by just adding an extra wooden cleat on the inside to beef up that joint. So we'll probably do that, but we'll see when the boat gets flipped over is when we'll worry about it. The other thing I could do, I could just put a fillet in here. You know, I could fillet this guy heavily until as far back as I feel like it, and of course in the finished boat it's just going to show as this sort of smooth transition between the two. I don't know if I really like that idea, but it is another possibility. So all kinds of ways we can bring structure to this little joint. All right, so I'm going to try and get this plank fitted right here. I've got a surmark on the tail end of my plank here, basically where it meets the stern post. And so I start the whole operation by just matching that up with the edge of my stern post. And that's giving me my fore and aft position. From there, I start down at the other end. I try and juggle the plank up to my lap line, and I start rolling it down into position. And I'm looking to make sure that it lays down nice and fair to all the rib bands along the way. And you might have to tack it in place back here. I feel like this wants to sit just a little bit low below my lap line. It's, you know, from one side to the next, something might be out by just a hair. I'm not going to get too fussed about that. As long as it has a fair line here and looks good, you know, if it ends up 1/16 wider or something than the other plank on the other side, no one's ever going to notice that. But as I do this, as I get it laying down flat, it's going to tell me how the attitude is. So, you know, right now this is really good right up here. You know, you want to keep clamping it down at your lap and see how it hits the other rib band. And right now, as I roll this into position, this is now sitting just a hair low. So that means that this whole thing can come up a little bit at this end. Or it has to come down at this end where the scarf is. Now my stock is just a little bit tight down there. I don't have the wiggle room, so I'm forced to work this end down. It's right here that my plank is hitting that rabbet and not landing quite fair. I might just kerf that out, actually. I might just kerf that out. So if we can get a clamp in here. This is really awkward for clamping is the main thing. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. This is exactly why I love this particular saw, because it's just right for doing this. Just sneaking into there and kerfing that just a hair. Because it's a nice thin blade, you know. I don't need to bring the plank too far out of its best position to make that work. So there we go. That few strokes just brought that in super nice and tight. I like that. That makes me happy. Okay, now clamp that there. Now to make it fit down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look right here. I'm going to look at the angle that I need to have this at and try and approximate that. And just keep checking your work as you go. Each stroke brings us a little bit closer. And there we are, we're home. That's done. Back looks good. With that fitting, what I want to do is I'm going to pop a screw in here right now, and that's going to help me make sure that when everything I do from here on forward, this is not going to change. This is all locked in. My gain is fitting real nice here. I'm not going to mess with that. The fit against the stern post looks like it's right bang on. Not going to mess with that. Feels like it fares in along here pretty good, so I'm not going to mess with any of that either. The scarf is ready to go together. Sometimes what I found when you're doing these scarf joints, one thing you can do is just leave a little bit of extra width right here on the inside of the scarf. Well, this is going to get trimmed down to the rib bands, just like the rest of the planking is going to go. But up here, because you may not get that line exactly right, what I've done is just left a little extra. After it's all glued up and cured, then I'll come back with a rabbet plane and just trim it down by eye until I get a nice smooth line running through there. And that works just fine. Gives you that little extra bit of wiggle room that you need to make sure that this ends up as a good structural joint without it screwing up the whole lay of the planking. All right. Well, that went really well. Using these little blocks glued on here in order to align the plank to worked beautifully. I'll definitely use that again. And I mean, this is stuck to a glassed over surface, so that, you know, I was more worried about these popping off because the surface was glassed. Wood to wood, there's of course, the worry that you're going to tear up the wood a little bit. What I might do is just use some masking tape on here for the blocks to stick to, because that's a common technique, to put masking tape on the thing that you want to glue a temporary block to, and then you glue to the masking tape. So we'll probably try that. My little scarf here, I'm kind of curious to see how that came out. So I just directly stapled this bit of blocking right down to the planking. It got a little squeeze out on the back side, so that's obvious. There's I got a little hump on this one. That one looks good. This one I was having trouble with the plank attitude, trying to get it dialed in just right. And I'm a little proud of my batten or my rib band on the bottom here by a bit. I'm not worried about that. I can ferre that out. It's not going to really affect the next plank that goes on in any appreciable way. But it does mean I got a little hump here, which I'll have to take out using I'll use a rabbet plane to try and just dress this down a bit. Now right now I'm just curious to know whether or not this is going to break away. So, okay, so here's our block. I nailed it directly on with the polymer nails. Now I just want to see if I can break it free. I'll just try slide my hammer against it from the side. There we go. That looks really nice. I got a little something to act as a fairing batten to have a look. Use a piece of plywood here. Beautiful. That came out pretty darn nice. It could be, yeah, I can't see anything wrong with that. It feels good. Now, one thing I'm kind of curious about, I'm thinking I should probably try slipping a putty knife in here, break the bonds of these nails to this block. I was wondering about doing that along my laps, actually. I don't know if that's necessary. Something I hadn't thought about exactly. I mean, there is the worry that all these tiny little nails, it's just a tiny bit protruding from them, but will they collectively just glue this thing down to the mold? Not the end of the world. I could just smash the mold right out of it if I really had to. But anyhow, that looks great. I'll just do this by eye, just getting down low. go. That's all there is to it. That looks fine. That looks just fine. So that little technique I think worked great. One thing these nails are not doing is staying flush with the surface, which they certainly did in some of my trial runs. I don't know what the deal is. It could be just maybe I need to dial back on the pressure on my nail gun, because it's going to take a little bit of filling. I'd probably just have to resign myself to the fact I'm going to be giving this thing the once over with a putty knife and live with it. So that's what I'll do. Okay, that looks great. Time to bevel all this off, and then we're ready to hang the next plank. But first thing we always need to remember to do is to spile for the adjacent plank first, because I put this next plank on, I lose my access to that rib band for this one. So this one's already traced out, sitting over here on the bench. Got to cut that out. I'm going to trace out for the next one first, and then we'll hang this one on there. All right, and you know what's funny? Like with the system, I could actually just trace out for all the planks all at once. I got a feeling that'd go sideways on me one way or another, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'll just take it one at a time. Okay, let's go. I had this stock on hand. It's leftovers from another project from many years ago. I thought I would just, it's already like scarf to length. It's about 12 feet long. And this is one of the reasons I didn't want to use wide stock, is because I cannot get this to lay down quite nicely to take the shape. It's the excess width is really impeding my ability to sort of get it to lay down properly in this area. I don't know what to do here. I might just cut it like extra over width to start with, and then lay it back on here and fit it again. I think that's what I should probably do, because I'm not confident in the way it's landing. If I cut it tight right now, I have a feeling that it's just going to go doink. I think what's going to happen is the end is going to drop out of below my height that I have right now. That's the one thing about Tom Hill's process. It involves taking like a whole half sheet of plywood and laying it over the boat. I suppose it works okay with a canoe. It has so much less shape than a boat like this, but with a beamier boat with more shape like this, it's just so awkward to try and wield a wide plank onto it, especially by yourself. Well, my suspicions were right on the money when I offered up this plank back onto the boat, and I put it on the other side just for the hell of it. I in fact lost a good solid ½ inch of height here at the bow, which is what I anticipated, because as if a plank is flared out near the top, as you roll it back down, the bow drops down. So I couldn't get it to lay down properly when I had it operated up before. Now I can, and I can see how this is exactly where it needs to be. So I'll pull this off now, marry it up with the other plank, and we'll cut both of them again. And this time we'll be cutting to the line, preparing it for hanging on the boat. All right, I'm starting to fit this plank in here into the tuck. I have traced out this one and trimmed it down to size. So this one just needs beveling. This one's done. The issue here is that we need to put a back bevel on the plank. We could only bevel the hung plank till about back here, and then everywhere else, the plank that's going to be hung needs to get a bevel. And so to that end, what I'm doing is I'm picking up some angles off of the mold. One thing I've done is I've just taken some of our stringer stock here, just take some little shorts and nailed them onto the molds. And that's to support the edge of this plank so I have the right attitude. So just tack that on there. And I just want it to lie down in the same orientation that it's going to lie in when it's done. I think I got to come back a little bit because nothing fits yet, so it's all a bit loosey-goosey. Okay, that's that. So back here it lands flush with the existing plank, and over down here it winds down. So let's see if I can figure out the best way to do this. All right. It seems like I never have a clamp at hand, despite the fact that I got about a bazillion clamps lying everywhere here. Okay. That's sort of where I want it to go. I can't, I'm having trouble getting to sort of wind down to the attitude that I want back here. Just, I don't know, just because I got no good way of holding it. Anyhow, so what I'm going to do is I've taken a piece of scrap plywood and I've just scribed a line on it that is the same width thickness as the plywood, and I just did that. I would work on the edge of the plywood, except that it's just a bit harder to draw on it and see on it. So I'm basically recreating the thickness of the plywood on this piece of scrap. And at each location, so there, I'm going to pick up a bevel. I've already actually done this on here, but so I've laid off that bevel across this little thing here and drawn a line. So we'll do the same here. Now I did it a little bit differently before, so we'll check my work. Yeah, that looks good. And we'll do it back here. That looked good too. Before I did it without the plank in place, I just went off the rib bands. And then at 5, I know I need to be flush. I need to be square to the plank. So what that's giving me is, it's giving me this winding bevel that I got to meet. And what I'm going to do is describe that as a graphically as a line on the back of this plank. So I could probably do it right here on the boat even. Okay. Need dividers. And for ongoing future reference, anytime I say dividers, I'm also referring to a pencil compass. I use the same term for both tools, and so you can, I mean, they do the same job. One just has a pencil, the other one doesn't. All right, so what we're going to do is the plank is sitting nominally in the same position it's going to, so I'm going to pick up, no, what I want to do is pick up the diagonal distance of the bevel that I created. Is that right? Let me think for a second. Yeah, no, I drew some perpendiculars here. I want the width of it across the perpendicular. So there we go. So back here at the transom, I want that. The next mold, I want this. The next one, I want this. By the time I get to 5, I want my full lap width. So if I grab my lap gauge and I lay that off back here at 5, or close to it, that's how wide I want it there. Now I'm going to get a flexible batten. Okay, so using a flexible batten, we'll just clamp that on here. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just making sure this batten touches these lines that I've laid out. Just trying to describe a fair line. Okay, and lastly there. And I'm just going to spring the batten down back here a ways. Come on. Don't do this. Okay, I'll do this. Yeah. Okay, I'm just checking that it's kind of springing fair. Once I've got all of that laid out, we're just going to draw a line in here. So all of this is going to become a beveled surface down to the outside corner of the plywood. But it's going to transition right about here to being full thickness. That's probably the trickiest part. And I don't have a good way to figure out exactly how that's going to work. Well, I know full thickness is right here, so I don't know. We'll figure it out. So I'm just going to take this whole thing over to the workbench and just bevel it right there rather than try and do it right here. All right, now back here I know I've got to be flat with the surface of the plank, and down there I wind down to a tight bevel. So I'm just going to check my plane. Too heavy a bite. I'm going to leave it sort of strong back here for the moment and just see if I can just start winding this bevel down over here. So I'm purposely just being a bit loosey-goosey back here, not starting too close to my finished lines, because I know I want to wind it down flat, and it's going to take a little more attention to detail. And I could work this way if I wanted to. Either way. The closer we get in here, the harder it is to see what I'm doing. So, especially when you're just working against these veneers, you can't see the surface that you planed very easily. And we'll just work our way down to the line, just trying to come down to just kissing the outside corner down here, and of course hitting my line here. And when I think I've done a good job of all that, I'll put it back on the boat and we'll just see how it fits. Okay, my first offering up looks pretty good actually. Fairly satisfied with most of the joint, so there's a few things you can try if you want to tweak it. One trick is to take sandpaper. In this case I'm using my self-adhesive stuff, which is a bit stiffer. We can try running that through the joint. It's kind of difficult to do though. Mostly it looks okay, but back here I'm not getting the best fit in this last little stretch between where the two planks are able to come like flat together and where they start to wind. So I think I'm going to get this back on the bench and try winding this down a little bit faster, and then we'll try it again. And I'll back and forth a few more times before I finally decide whether or not I'm happy about that. And once I got all that dealt with, I'm going to trim back the tail end so that it meets my finished lap width or finished plank width. And we'll take it about, somewhere back into here, because the router, remember, I don't want to run the router in these sort of potentially loose tail ends. I mean, they're nailed on, but you never know if they could pop off, and I don't want that to happen. But so we're keeping the router action back here in the areas where it's more secure, and then we finish it off by eye with just a block plane. All in all though, I'm quite happy with the fit. I'm just going to give myself a couple of sur marks here. Now the existing, I sort of roughed in where the plank edge might be, but it doesn't feel like I did the best job of that, at least not back here. It's not too far off, but of course, because of the angle, our full plank width doesn't end up being the same. We end up with quite a narrow little bevel back here. It's like a 1/4 inch contact, which is why we'll try and figure out a way to beef up that whole joint later on after this is off the mold. But for now, we'll leave it the way it is. And now I'm just going to try and wind this down a little bit faster somehow. Now we did cover fiberglassing the bottom in this video, but we did in our Building the Bushidoori series. You can catch that video right here. Now that should keep you entertained until we're back building the Catalina Wherry. See you later, folks.